Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So today's episode comes to you courtesy of Thomas, who's been supporting this channel as a Golden Pig tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Thomas, so again, Thomas, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck tag, Thomas chose a Prossh deck focused on Kobold and Kher Keep cards. Prossh Skyraider of Kher is a 5/5 dragon with flying that costs 3 black, red, green. When you cast Prossh Skyraider of Kher, create X01 red Kobold creature tokens named Kobolds of Kher Keep, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast Prossh. And by sacrificing another creature, Prossh gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So Prossh is a very interesting and unique commander because though you might have to pay more for it when it dies and pay that extra commander tax, you actually get a benefit for paying more. The more mana that you pay, the more of those kobolds that you make. And of course, Prossh can utilize those creatures, being a fantastic free sacrifice outlet itself. So you can sacrifice those creatures and essentially give Prossh a lot of fire breathing to make it hit for a ton, and of course there are plenty of other ways to gain value from sacrificing those creatures in these colors. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, this is going to be a deck that's focused on Kobold and Kher Keep cards, and some of those cards can be quite expensive. Who knew that those tiny little kobolds commanded such a price tag? Regardless, I decided to make this deck into a fun budget challenge for myself. Every single card in this deck is going to be $1 or less, except for those Kobold cards, so we'll get to those prices here in a bit. Regardless, with all that said, let's first talk about some ramp to get this commander out. First up, on turn 1, we're going to be utilizing some cards like Search for Tomorrow and Fauna Fertility. Search for Tomorrow has to spend 2 for just a green, and when we cast it, we get to search our library for a basic land and it comes into play untapped. And then Fauna Fertility is somewhat like a Wayfarer's Bauble, but on an enchantment. By paying 1 and a green, we sack it to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, we've got some great turn 2 plays for this deck with Rampant Growth, Explore, and Nest Invader. Rampant Growth is going to get us 1 basic into play tapped, Explore is going to let us play an extra land this turn and draw a card, and then Nest Invader is a fantastic creature that can work really well with Prossh. It's a 2/2, but when it enters the battlefield, we get a 0/1 Colossal Drowsy spawn that we can sacrifice for mana. So 2 bodies for 2 mana is pretty good, and on top of that, again, we're going to have plenty of ways to benefit from actually sacrificing creatures. But next up, let's move on to some 3 mana ramp spells with Cultivate, Grow from the Ashes, and Harrow. Cultivate gets us 2 basics, 1 goes into our hand, and 1 goes into play tapped. And then Grow from the Ashes is going to get us 1 basic into play untapped, or 2 if we kicked it. Next up, there's Harrow, which makes us sacrifice 1 land and get 2 basics into play untapped. And finally, at 4 mana, we've got some even bigger ramp spells with Terramorph, Migration Path, and Vastwood Surge. Terramorph gets us 1 basic into play untapped, but it also has Rebound, so we get to cast it a second time. And then Migration Path is going to get us 2 basics into play tapped, or we can also cycle it for 2. And finally, Vastwood Surge is going to get us 2 basics into play tapped, and also if we kicked it, we get 2 counters on each creature we control. So later on in the game, this can not only ramp us, but it can also make our entire army deadlier, including all those little kobolds. And speaking of those kobolds, like I mentioned before, this deck is going to be utilizing other kobolds like Kobolds of Kher Keep, Crimson Kobolds, and Crookshank Kobolds. Each of these are very simple creatures. They are 0 mana creatures that are 0/1s. So we don't even have to pay mana for these creatures that can actually provide us a good amount of value again, because we've got plenty of ways in this deck to gain value from sacrificing creatures like these. And we've also got 2 newer kobolds that we can add to this deck as well with Rograk, Son of Roga, and Minion of the Mighty. Rograk is also a 0/1 for 0, but on top of that, it's got First Strike, Menace, and Trample, so if we can pump it, it can become even deadlier. Or I should say, deadlier, because yeah, a 0/1 isn't exactly deadly on its own. And then Minion of the Mighty is a 0/1 Kobold with Menace that costs a red, so yeah, this one's quite expensive for a Kobold, being 1 mana. Regardless, it's got Pack Tactics. Whenever it attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, you may put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Next up, we've also got some kobolds that can actually help our other kobolds out with Kobold Taskmaster and Kobold Drill Sergeant. Kobold Taskmaster is a 1/2 that's going to give other kobolds we control +1/+0. And then Kobold Drill Sergeant is a 1/2 that's going to give all of our kobolds +0/+1 in trample. So these can pump our kobold army, including the kobolds that our commander is going to be making. But of course, there is one kobold that stands far above the rest, and that's going to be the golden pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the golden pig of this deck is Roga of Kher. Roga is a very old card, so I'm going to read its Oracle attacks. It's a 5/5 kobold that costs 2 black, red. It has at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay red. If you don't, tap Roga of Kher and all creatures named Kobolds of Kher, then an opponent gains control of them. Creatures you control named Kobolds of Kher get +2/+2. Again, the focus of this deck is built around Kobolds and Kher cards, and yeah, Roga fits right in. Again, obviously this is going to pump that one card, named Kobolds of Kher, but on top of that, and more importantly, it's going to pump every single creature token that Prossh makes. So let's just say we cast Prossh for 6 mana, we are getting 6 of those kobolds, and now they're going to be 2 3s. That's a total of 12 power on top of Prosh's power that it already has. And again, the more times that we cast Prossh and the more that we pay for Prossh, the more kobolds we're going to get and the more power we get out of this. Regardless, obviously there is a cost to keep this around, because if we don't pay that red in our upkeep, well, we are losing it and an opponent gets all of our kobolds. But if we don't want to pay for that red and we have Prossh in play, obviously we still have a way around that by, just sacrificing this if we really want to. So yeah, for a deck that focuses on kobolds and Kher cards, this card is fantastic and is most definitely the golden pig. And because this deck wants to focus on those types of cards, we are also going to want ways to actually tutor for this, with Diabolic Tutor and Razcast Right. Each essentially just let us get any card in our library and put into our hand, and on top of that, Razcast Right has cycling for a black. And then we can also tutor specifically for Roga with things like Netherborn Phalanx and Fierce Empath. Netherborn Phalanx has, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life for each creature they control, so we can utilize it in that way if we want to, but if we want to tutor, we can use Transmute for 1 black. And then Fierce Empath has, when it enters the battlefield, we can search our library for a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or greater, reveal it, put it in our hand, then shuffle our library. And keep in mind that Roga is not the only one that costs 6 in this deck, so we can get other things too if we want to. Regardless, outside of tutors, let's talk about some ways now to actually dig through our deck to get to the cards that we need. First up, let's talk about cards like Season of Growth, Catacomb Sifter, and Viscera Seer that can help us scry. Season of Growth says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1, and whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. Our commander again makes a ton of tokens when it comes into play, so we get to scry a lot of times in a row and get to the cards that we need. And then Catacomb Sifter works in a similar but kind of opposite direction. It says, when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 Eldrazi that you can sacrifice for mana, and whenever another creature you control dies, scry 1. So this gives us a scry on the other end rather than giving us when our creatures enter, it gives it when they die. And speaking of that, we can actually sacrifice the creatures to scry with Viscera Seer. It has simply sacrifice a creature, scry 1. So like Prossh, this is a fantastic free sacrifice outlet that can give us a lot of value throughout the game. Next up, we've got some creatures that can draw us a lot of cards with Liliana Standard Bearer and Smothering Abomination. The Standard Bearer has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards, where X number of creatures that died under your control this turn. So essentially, we can just wait until right before our turn, sacrifice a lot of our creatures for value, and then just cast this and draw a ton. And speaking of sacrificing creatures for value, there's Smothering Abomination, which has flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. So yeah, with Prossh in play, this can draw us an absurd amount of cards by sacrificing those kobolds. And speaking of which, we can also draw a ton of cards with cards like Fecundity, Moldavine Reclamation, and Deathreap Ritual. Fecundity simply says, whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. So this does count our opponents as well, and keep that in mind, but most of the time this is going to benefit us a lot more than it benefits them. And then Moldavine Reclamation just benefits us. It says, whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So yeah, throughout the game, this can really pad our life total and refill our hand. And then Deathreap Ritual says at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, you may draw a card. So essentially, with each trip around the table, this can draw us up to 4 cards, and again, with a free sacrifice out like our commander and tokens in play to sacrifice, we can make sure we do that every single time. Next up though, there's Shamanic Revelation, which just straight up draws us a card for each creature that we control, so yeah, having those creatures in play can help us out too. And even a small spell like Village Rites can be very impactful as well. To cast it, we've got to sacrifice a creature, and it lets us draw 2 cards. So again, one of our tiny kobolds for 2 cards is going to be well worth it. But we can also utilize one of those kobolds with Victimize. It says, choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen card to the battlefield tapped. So again, just sacrificing 1 small token to get 2 bigger creatures in play can be really impactful. And then there's Garner the Bloodflame, which has flash, and when it comes into play, return all creature cards in your graveyard that are put there from anywhere this turn, and other creatures you control have haste. So first up, giving all of our other creatures haste can be huge, again, so we get to swing with Prossh right away. But again, this can be a fantastic recursion spell, especially after someone tries to wipe the board, and then yeah, we just get all of our creatures back in our hand. So that we can just refill a board and take control of the game from there. And speaking of filling the board, outside of Prossh, we've got other ways to make tokens as well with things like Sprouting Thrynex, Errasa the Endless Web, and Phylath World Sculptor. Sprouting Thrynex has, when it dies, create 3 1/1 green sapling creature tokens, so yeah, 4 bodies in total for 3 mana, sign me up. And then Errasa the Endless Web says whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/2 green spider creature token with reach. So if this sticks around for a while, it can make us quite a bit of tokens. But then Phylath can make us a lot of tokens all at once. It says, when it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each basic land you control. On top of that, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get 4++1 counters on target plant you control. So, though those plants start off small, they can get huge in absolutely no time. Next up, we've got a consistent token generator with From Beyond. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield it has, sacrifice this creature, add colors to your mana pool. So this can be fantastic token generation that can also generate as temporary ramp. And then we've got Emrakul's Evangel, which has tap, sacrifice it and any number of other non-Eldrazi creatures, put a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token onto the battlefield for each creature sacrificed this way. So essentially with this, we can turn all of our tokens, well, all of our non-Eldrazi tokens, including the ones our commander makes, into 3/2s, while at the same time getting any death benefits from all those creatures. And speaking of death benefits, there's Fresh Meat, which says create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each creature put in your graveyard from the battlefield this turn. So we can essentially again sacrifice all of our tokens and yeah, just make a lot of 3/3 beasts to take over the game. We can also work to protect our commander and get more tokens potentially out of it with things like Verdant Rebirth and Demonic Vigor. Verdant Rebirth says until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return to its owner's hand and draw a card. So again, by getting Prossh back to our hand when we recast it, we're going to be getting more Kobold tokens. And then Demonic Vigor is somewhat similar. It's an aura that says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and whenever enchanted creature dies, return that card to its owner's hand. Next up, there's Professor's Warning, which helps us out in a different way. It says choose one, put a +1 counter on target creature, or target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. So again, this can save our commander from a lot of things, or just slightly pump it if we just really want it to be slightly pumped. Prossh can easily kill our opponents with commander damage, again by sacrificing a lot of creatures in play. So that slight pump could definitely make a difference. But outside of commander damage, what other ways can we finish off our opponents? First up, let's talk about Warstorm Surge, which says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So with this, we can ping pretty much anything whenever our creatures come into play, or at least I should say the creatures that have power greater than 0. But again, even the tokens that our commander makes can actually ping our opponents when we do have Roga in play. Next up, there's Outpost Siege, which pings our opponents in a different way. If we choose Dragons, it says whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to any target. So simply by sacrificing creatures, now we can just ping out some damage as well. And speaking of that, Mayhem Devil says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So keep in mind this not only counts us sacrificing things, but our opponents as well. And then there's Carter Doomscourge, which is a 4/3 Demon Berserker, and when it enters the battlefield, until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat of Fable and attack a player other than you of Fable. So this essentially is a massive goad that can really help us out. And on top of that, whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So obviously with that goad effect, that can really help with that, but you know what? We can just swing with our kobolds or any of our other tokens and sacrifice them while they're attacking with our commander to drain opponents too. Next up, there's Poison Tip Archer, which is a 2/3 with reach and death touch, and it has whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So this not only counts our creatures, but our opponent's creatures dying as well. And then Sir Conrad the Grim punishes our opponents whenever creatures essentially go anywhere. It says whenever the creature dies or a creature card is put to a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. And on top of all that, we can pay 1 in a black to make each player mill a card to hopefully hit some creatures. And of course, we can also utilize some other fantastic death triggers like Zulaport Cutthroat and Falkreath Noble. Zulaport Cutthroat says whenever it or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. And then Falkreath Noble says whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So one is more of a wide spread out approach and one is more focused, but each can be incredibly impactful. Next up, there's Ogre Battle Driver, which says whenever the creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+2 and gains haste until end of turn. So of course, this can help our commander get pumped and swing right away, but also it pumps our kobolds too. So when we make all those tokens, we can just, swing right away with them and potentially get some damage through. And finally, there's Return of the Wild Speaker, which can help us out in multiple ways. It says choose one, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So by sacrificing a lot of creatures and getting Prossh huge, well, we can just draw a lot of cards. Or, we can just pump our entire army out of nowhere and all those small kobolds that weren't doing anything can hit pretty hard. But now that we talked about our plan and how we're gonna win, how do we throw a wrench into our opponent's plans? First up, let's talk about some creatures that can help us out with Masked Vandal, Reclamation Sage, and Brutalizer Exarch. Masked Vandal says when it enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, exile target artifact or enchantment opponent controls. Again, with this deck, that's a very easy requirement for us to meet. We're probably gonna have a lot of creatures in our graveyard, so yeah, just exile one of those and exile one of their things. And then Reclamation Sage has when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. Next up, there's Brutalizer Exarch, which when it enters the battlefield, you choose one. Search your library for a creature card, reveal it, then shuffle your library, put that card on top of it, or put target non-creature permanent on the bottom of its owner's library. So this can either be fantastic removal or a fantastic tutor for this deck. And then we're also going to be running Unravel the Aether and Return to Nature. Unravel the Aether says choose target artifact or enchantment, its owner shuffles it into their library. And the Return to Nature is very flexible. It says choose one, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. Next up, we've got some ways to deal with a lot of things with Hex, Comet Storm, and Gaze of Granite. Hex is going to destroy 6 target creatures, Comet Storm has multi-kicker 1, and we can choose any target, then choose any target for each time the spell is kicked. It's going to deal X damage to each of them. And then Gaze of Granite says destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less. So each of these can help us out in a lot of situations. And finally, we've got Nevinyrral's Disc, which can deal with pretty much, well, everything. It's going to enter the battlefield tapped, and we can pay 1 to tap to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So this is a great panic button to have, just in case we need it. But now we've talked about all the non-land cards in this deck, let's jump quickly into the lands. First up, there's Kher Keep, which can tap for a color, so we can pay 1 in a red and tap it to create a 0/1 red Kobold creature token named Kobolds of Kher Keep. So obviously in a deck that wants to focus on Kobold and Kher Keep cards, this is pretty fantastic being Kher Keep. And then Rogue's Passage can tap for a color, so we can pay 4 and tap it, and target creature can't be blocked this turn. Again, we can take out our opponents with commander damage pretty easily with Prossh, so yeah, making it unblockable is pretty fantastic. And then we've got Command Tower, which can tap for any of our colors, and Exotic Orchard, which can tap for any of our colors most of the time. Next up, there's Ash Barrens, which has basic land cycling for 1, and then Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse are some fantastic budget fetch lands. Up next, we've got 2 ways to ramp with lands with Mirrored Landscape and Blighted Woodland. Mirrored Landscape lets us get any 2 basic lands that share a land type into play tapped. And then Blighted Woodland doesn't have that restriction and it gets us 2 basic lands into play tapped. Up next, we're going to run our 3 thriving lands with Bluff, Grove, and Moor. Each come into play tapped and tap for 1 color, and we can also choose a color when they come into play and they tap for that one too. And then we've got Jungle Hollow, Kazanu Refuge, and Rugged Highlands, each of which come into play tap for one of our 2 colors, and gain us 1 life. And we've also got 2 more lands that do the exact same thing with Bloodfell Caves and Akoum Refuge, both of which are going to tap for black or red. And finally, we're going to round out the deck with 19 basic lands, 9 of which are going to be a forest, 6 will be a swamp, and 4 will be a mountain. Again, like I mentioned before at the start of this episode, I tried to make this deck as budget as possible while still making it focus on those Kobold and Kher Keep cards. And believe me, a lot of those Kobold cards were quite expensive. I mean, Roga itself was over $85, and as you can see, Kobold Drill Sergeant was $17 and some change. So yeah, every single other card in this deck outside of the Kobold cards and the Commander are less than $1. Regardless, at the end of the day, I'm really happy with how this deck turned out. If you're looking to play this deck, consider joining the amazing PlayEDH Discord. It's a great way to play Commander over webcam. In the description below, you'll find their Discord invite link as well as the tier that this deck has been approved at next to the deck list. So if you want to pick it up and play it as is, you can, and be sure to read their welcome information for more details. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.